Max Q Productions presents Calling All Stations, a novel, written and narrated by Gilles Messier. Chapter 9, Ships in the Night. I woke at 7 bells with a hard shaft of sunlight streaming onto my face. We had at last cleared the fog. The deck shuddered beneath me as the Richelieu plowed ahead at full steam, racing to make up lost time. Rising from my cramped bed, I found myself alone in the radio room. A rough slice of bread and cheese had been left for me on the table, which I eagerly devoured before wandering over to the door. Half-heartedly I tried the handle, recoiling in surprise as it clicked open. It was then I remembered that I was no longer a prisoner. I had the run of the ship. Overcome with relief and excitement, I flung open the door and stepped out onto the deck. I was greeted by a magnificent sight. A gargantuan spire of rock towered over the Richelieu, so tall its peak disappeared into the clouds. I gasped, having never seen the likes of it. As a young boy, I had marveled at the soaring spires and domes of London, but even these were dwarfed by this leviathan. Gibraltar, said a voice. Les piliers d'Hercule. Jacques stood at the rail, cigarette dangling from the corner of his mouth as he gazed pensively at the looming mountain. Belongs to the English, he said. Take a good look. This is the last you'll see of home for a long time. We're not going there? No, we lost too much time in the fog. Captain decided to go right to the end. Where are we going? Through there, said Jacques, pointing to the open sea beyond the great mountain. To Ceuta, in Spanish Morocco. Morocco. Even the name sounded irresistibly exotic. As with the rest of the world, I knew this land only from Father's books, and then only those facts useful to a lighthouse keeper. I knew it was a colony of France and Spain, that its capital was Rabat, and that its flag was a green 5-pointed star on a red field. I also knew its inhabitants spoke French and Arabic and were mainly Muslim, whatever that meant. Until now it had only lived in my imagination, but soon I would see it with my own eyes. What is it like? Morocco, I asked, my head dancing with fantastic visions. Jacques smirked. You really don't know anything, do you? Stung, I dropped my eyes to the deck. Morocco, said Jacques after a moment. Well, I suppose. He was cut short by the blare of a bugler up on the flying bridge. Viens, said Jacques, and I followed him up to the bridge as the crew gathered on the foredeck for their morning inspection. By the way, what is that? I said, pointing to the flag. The symbol of La Légion, said Jacques. La Légion? La Légion étrangère, the foreign legion. At my blank expression, Jacques drew a weary sigh. The greatest fighting force in the world, he explained. Men from all nations, from every corner of the world, joined La Légion to fight for France. Why would they do that? I asked, thinking it a queer, even traitorous notion for men to fight for a country other than their own. Jacques shrugged. Many reasons. Some for glory, some for adventure, some have no money, or criminals running from the law. They join to get a fresh start, a new identity, citizenship of France, if they last long enough, of course. So you were all in the Legion? Oh yes, said Jacques, puffing out his chest with pride. 2e Régiment de Marche. So, when did you become pirates? I asked. Jacques burst into laughter. Where do you get these ideas? He said. We're not pirates, Edward, we're traders. Traders? Traders, Jacques repeated. We carry the cargo from France, yes? I nodded. So if you're all soldiers, then why? Well, look at us, said Jacques, sweeping his hand across the ragged collection of men assembled below, everyone missing some part or other of his anatomy. We fight, we give everything for France, but we give too much. Not enough left, not that anyone would want. Nowhere to go, nowhere to work when the war is over. They were on the streets, beggars, all of them. I thought back to that afternoon in Dundee, and those shattered wretches lurking in the alleyway. All but the captain, Jacques continued. He could have gone back to his life, to his estate, to his wife and children, but he sees his men, his brothers, his real children, dying in les égouts, and, well, how can a man stand it? So he buys a ship, makes us all his crew, gives us freedom, gives us a future, gives us purpose. So, I said after a moment, why aren't you... Jacques gestured for me to be quiet. The captain had just appeared on the foredeck. Compagnie, said the captain once the crew had finished their dirge-like anthem. We make Ceuta in 12 hours. We're already 24 hours behind schedule, and we all know Captain Barr isn't one to accept excuses. So we'll make a run to Fnideck, offload the cargo, and make contact with Rassouli. He won't give us the best price, but it will be better than nothing. You have 8 hours to rig the ship for night running. We enter the strait at 20 hours. Understood? Oui, Capitaine, the crew barked back. Compagnie, where is your home? Legio Patria Nostra! Dismissed. As the crew dispersed, I turned to Jacques in confusion. What does that mean? I asked. What's going on? Nothing you need to worry about, said Jacques. But why? Enough, said Jacques. One more question, Edward, and no more. Understand? I gaped in dismay. A million questions swirled around in my head. After my long marooning, I had suddenly been thrust into the world with all its dazzling sights, sounds, and wonders. How could one even begin to comprehend it all with only a single question? But in the end, I chose not to pry into the ship's business. As a member of the crew, I would find out soon enough. What was that song they were singing? I asked. Le Boudin, said Jacques. It's our marching song, the song of la Légion. What does it mean? Jacques paused and stroked his chin for a moment. Boudin is saucisse, he explained. Sausage made with blood? Like black pudding, I ventured. I do not know, said Jacques, but that is what we call la couverte, the blanket on our bags we carry on our backs, yes? I nodded. A long time ago, when we fought the Austrians, the king of Belgique said his subjects could not join la Légion. So we sing, here is Boudin for those from Switzerland, Alsace, Lorraine, but not Belgique. They are tireurs au cul, lazy shirkers. And then we say we are rogues, not ordinary men, we have our problems, we are légionnaires. And then we sing about our great battles, Tonkin and Cameron. Where is that? Indochine, said Jacques, in the Orient. And Cameron is in Mexico. Anyway, then we sing, our ancestors knew how to die for the glory of la Légion. We are prepared to die following tradition. What happened there? I interjected. Tonkin and Cameron. Assez, Jacques snapped. I said one question, and I am... Moi no! The captain's voice roared from the deck below. If he wants to be paid and fed, he has to work. And you, go check on the cargo. Oui, Capitaine, said Jacques with a half-hearted salute. The captain flashed him a glare before disappearing into his cabin. Viens, said Jacques. There is much to do. I followed Jacques down into the hold, where he pulled a large keyring from his pocket and fumbled through it. Here, he said, handing me a key. Go to locker 2D, get yourself some new clothes. Then go to the paint locker, 2F, get 4 cans of black, and chaise de maître. Bosun's chair? Oui, vas-y. I nodded and scurried off into the hold. The heavy keyring felt good in my hand, like a token of trust, a reminder that I was now truly a member of the crew. I felt better still once I'd changed out of the filthy, sodden clothes I'd been wearing since escaping Belle Rock. The locker was piled high with old uniforms, from which I pulled a fresh outfit of red breeches, sturdy boots, a quilted jumper, and a dark blue tunic. Buoyed by my sudden change in circumstances, I playfully rapped my knuckles on the wall as I ambled on down the corridor. Then suddenly I froze as a faint tapping answered mine. Aidez-moi. Aidez-moi. In an instant, I came crashing back to earth. Though by good fortune I had managed to escape my own bondage, the prisoner, and likely many more like him, still lay locked away below. Were they the cargo the captain was so eager to deliver? Were Captain Barra and Rassouli fellow slavers impatiently awaiting their shipment? Could I be sure I wouldn't be tossed in with them the moment we arrived in Morocco? Endless questions flooded into my mind faster than I could bail them out. It was a long, stunned moment before I realized I held the answer right in my hand. The ship's keys. Quietly I padded down the corridor, following the tapping to its source, locker 2B. I could see the door rattling in its frame with each dot and dash. He was in there all right. I rifled through the keyring and tried each in turn, pausing every second to glance nervously over my shoulder. One after another the keys jammed or spun loosely in the lock, until at last one slid in smoothly and turned with a satisfying click. I reached for the handle. Edouard, Jacques bellowed. Did you find it? Be right there, I answered, pulling the key from the lock. The mystery would have to wait. When I returned to the hold, I found Jacques packing handfuls of straw into an opened crate. What's in there? I asked. Cognac, said Jacques, pulling a squat glass bottle from the straw. Les colons like a taste of home. Now go up and paint the wheelhouse, all over, no white left. Nodding, I lifted the paint cans and started up the stairs. Edouard, les clés, Jacques called after me. Drat, I thought, and knowing that to hesitate would be suspicious, I tossed him the keys. That afternoon found me hanging from the mast in a bosun's chair, slathering every inch of the wheelhouse in a thick coat of black paint. Though the reason for this task eluded me, I could hardly complain of the view. Up in the rigging, I felt like a gull or albatross soaring high above the waves, the tropical sun kissing my face and the salt air ruffling my hair. As the pale sliver of the African coast drew ever closer, little boats with tall triangular sails began appearing all around us. Their crews, dressed in strange white robes and skullcaps, waved at me as they sailed past, and when two of them met, a spontaneous regatta inevitably broke out, for everywhere in the world sailors are all alike. I had nearly finished my work when suddenly the funnel ceased its oily belching, and I heard the telltale splash of the anchor being lowered. I frowned. Had the captain not ordered every sheet bent to reach Hueta by nightfall? It was also then that I noticed the sun. Though it was not yet 4 bells, it was already grazing the horizon, falling so quickly I swore I could see it move. It would be dark soon. I quickly finished my painting and lowered myself to the deck where Jacques was waiting for me. "Viens," he said, beckoning me down a hatchway. "We go eat." As before, I filled my bowl from the cauldron and retreated to the corner of the mess, trying my best to be neither seen nor heard. When the chaotic din of banter, singing, and card games had reached its peak, Jacques leaned over and pointed to each crew member in turn, giving me my first proper introduction to the men of the Richelieu. They were a rose gallery of desperate ruffians hailing from every corner of the globe. There were Santos Colombo, the helmsman, a former Brazilian Navy man and the only true mariner among the crew. After leading a mutiny and murdering a superior officer, he'd fled to French Guiana and joined the Legion to escape the continent. Stéphane Doré, a.k.a. the Scarred Man, was in charge of loading cargo. A railroad laborer in France before the war, one night he'd met a recruiting officer in a tavern who plied him with liquor and tricked him into signing enlistment papers. He awoke the next morning to find himself in the Legion. His younger brother Pierre joined up the next day. "He wanted adventure," said Jacques, shaking his head. "Well, he certainly got it." "What happened?" I asked. "The war happened," said Jacques bitterly. "He never recovered." Of this Jacques said no more. The bearded giant was Ivan Kaminsky, former guard for the Russian Tsar. When the royal family was overthrown by a people's revolution, Ivan trekked for weeks through frozen wilderness to escape the country. Stranded in France with no home, no family, and no money, he joined the Legion just to survive. "And how about you?" I asked Jacques. "Why did you join up?" Suddenly Jacques leaned in close and dropped his voice to a whisper. "Let me tell you something, Edward," he said. "It is never good to tell too much about yourself. What you know, where you have been, all that you are, these are precious things, yes? Keep them to yourself, as much as you can. Never give them away. They are your power. The less others know about you, the more power you have. Understand?" I stared blankly at him, baffled by the strange advice. But at that moment the black-skinned machinist entered the mess. "How about him?" I said. "Where is he from?" "Thierry," said Jacques. "Oh, the darkest of dark jungles of Africa." "Really?" "Yes, from the most savage of tribes. When he joined La Légion, he could not speak French. He only spoke in clicks." Jacques contorted his face and clicked his tongue, producing the queerest collection of sounds I had ever heard. Across the table, the machinist shot us a murderous glare before flinging a ladleful of stew into his bowl and slinking from the room. "Why is his skin like that?" I asked. "Was he burned or something?" "No," said Jacques. "He was born that way." "Really?" Jacques nodded. "They all are down there. Black as ébène. Don't worry, when we get to Hueta you'll see plenty more nègres like him." Once again, Jacques leaned in close. "But take it from me, Edward," he whispered. "Be careful around him, yes? Stay away, far away as you can. Never let him catch you alone." "Why?" "Because," said Jacques, "he's a cannibal." I nearly choked on my meal, sputtering and spraying stew all over my shirt. "A cannibal?" "Oh yes," said Jacques. "When we were in combat we had to bury the dead quickly so we would not eat them. And at night we slept in turns, one man always keeping watch in case he got hungry. But of course we could not get rid of him. He fought with the strength of 10 men. Vrai fauve, a beast." "Here," he said, pinching the flesh on my arm, "you can only get tough soldier meat, like salt horse. But a little boy like you would be like veau agneau tendre, so be careful, yes?" Suddenly it all made sense, all that furtive, hungry-eyed gazing from the shadows. He had been watching his prey, greedily licking those great lips as he waited for the perfect moment to strike. I felt my insides curdle. It was like emerging from the woods at night, only to learn that a wolf had been stalking you the whole time. I had been lucky to leave that engine room alive. "And what about his hand?" I pried. "How did he lose that?" "I imagine one of his fellow tribesmen must have eaten it," said Jacques. I had hardly a moment to process this grotesque revelation when the crew suddenly rose and snapped to attention. The captain had entered. "We weigh anchor in 20 minutes, once the engine repairs are complete," he said. "Everyone report to your stations for night running. No lights, no smoking, no talking. Nothing shines, nothing rattles. Understood?" "Oui, capitaine." I fell in with the crew as they filed from the mess, but the captain stopped me at the door. No, he said, not you. But put him somewhere out of the way, he said to Jacques. Make sure he stays there. I glanced hopefully at Jacques, but he shook his head. Go to the radio room, Edouard, he said. Stay quiet, no noise, nothing, and don't turn on any lights. Don't leave until I come for you, understand? But I can help, I protested. Whatever it is, I'm sure I can. Enough, Jacques snapped. No, you will get in the way. Now go. When I reached the deck, it was already dark, the last rays of sunlight lingering as a thin lilac glow on the horizon. In their place, a carpet of stars had unfurled across the sky, bathing the dark waters in a cold glow. Every light on the Richelieu had been put out, rendering it all but invisible in the gloom. But dead ahead, the view was a riot of light and color. Beneath the Rock of Gibraltar, twinkling with hundreds of lights like an enormous Christmas tree, the green and red running lights of dozens of ships milled back and forth across the strait. Ignoring the captain's orders, I started forward along the rail, hoping to catch a better view from the bow. But my eyes had not yet adjusted to the gloom, and I immediately collided with the crewman. I held out my hands, bracing for the inevitable kick or punch, but none came. The man simply raised his fingers to his lips and returned to his station. As my eyes adjusted, I saw the shapes of dozens of men lined up along the gunwales, just as they had in the fog bank. The whole ship was eerily quiet, the engine throttled so far back I could barely feel it beneath my feet. Only the occasional creak of the hull could be heard above the distant symphony of steam whistles, foghorns, and bells. I looked upon the scene with mounting horror. Steaming into such a busy sea lane with all lights doused was beyond reckless. It was suicidal. Yet the men lining the gunwale seemed unworried, as though they had done this many times before. But how on earth would we run that gauntlet, I wondered? And for that matter, why? I glanced up in confusion at the flying bridge where the captain stood silhouetted against the crescent moon, peering through binoculars into the darkness. Though every light had been put out, I was still the only one in the dark. Because at that moment I realized I would never truly be one of the crew. I would always be an unwelcome guest, a useful nuisance. I had started back towards the radio room as the captain had ordered when suddenly an idea struck me. Inspired by my run-in with the sailor on the deck, I doubled back and started up the ladder to the flying bridge. No longer would I wait for Jacques to bring me information, like bowls of stew shoved through my cell door. I would find out for myself. Up on the bridge, Colombo stood at the helm, his swarthy features bathed in the dim glow of the compass binnacle. Beside him, Jacques crouched before an alidade, a small telescope mounted on a rotating pedestal. Pausing at the top of the ladder, I watched as a strange ritual played out between the two men. Jacques shuffled back and forth, swinging the alidade in ever-shrinking arcs. Mur marinade, 20 degrees, he whispered, marking a line on the map spread out beside him. In response, Colombo adjusted his course, the spokes of the wheel passing smoothly from hand to hand. The whole process then repeated like clockwork, each man a link in a well-oiled machine deftly and silently guiding the Richelieu up the strait. Café l'Américain, Jacques whispered. 32... Silence, the captain hissed, dropping his binoculars in alarm. Colombo's hand reached out and shuttered the binnacle, plunging the bridge into darkness. Directly ahead, one light among the dazzling galaxy had turned towards the Richelieu and was drawing swiftly closer. Maintain your course, said the captain, reaching for the engine room telegraph. Carefully he inched the handle forward notch by notch, careful not to make a sound. Beneath my feet I felt a rumble as the engine spun up. The approaching ship continued to grow, its single indistinct light splitting into three, red, white, and green. Soon the deep thrum of her engines rose to meet the Richelieu's, and the little black shapes of crewmen could be seen moving about her deck as she plowed ahead, oblivious to the blacked-out ship directly in her path. Colombo, too, stayed his course, the wheel held firmly in his sinewy hands. The captain stood beside him, one hand wrapped around the engine telegraph, the other raised above his head. I could see the other ship's funnels now, the lifeboats and davits hanging off her beam, the bollards and anchor chains on her deck. Every second that passed, I was certain the captain would order her to turn, but his hand remained steady. What on earth was he doing, I thought, with growing alarm. Was he going to ram her? Turn, turn, I muttered under my breath. I could see the faces of their captain and helmsman clearly through the pilot-house windows. She was right on us. I gripped the rail tightly, bracing for impact. Turn, turn. Finally, the captain dropped his hand and cranked back on the telegraph. The engines went silent. The helm spun to a blur as Colombo threw it hard to port, the bow lurching as it swung wide around the approaching ship. All eyes swung across the bridge as she glided past, barely 2 fathoms away. She was enormous, half again as tall as Richelieu, her black hull studded with hundreds of glowing portholes. Through these I caught glimpses of lush staterooms adorned in brass, crystal, and velvet, and elegant couples dressed in their finest evening wear. Yet not one head turned in our direction, not one voice sounded the alarm. None aboard would ever know how close they had come to a watery end. The last I glimpsed of her was her name, SS Egypt, emblazoned across her fantail, before she melted away into the night, just one more pinprick of light among hundreds. It was only at that moment I became aware of the 3 pairs of angry eyes bearing down on me. "Go below," the captain mouthed, jabbing his finger towards the ladder. But I stood my ground, knowing they could not risk the commotion of expelling me. A pantomime of angry gestures followed, but in the end they gave up and returned to their duties, leaving me to observe from the corner. Hours passed, the Richelieu slipping unseen past all manners of vessels, from those little lateen-rigged skiffs to huge liners and freighters. But our progress up the strait was agonizingly slow, and before long the midnight chill has seeped through my tunic, setting my teeth chattering. "Silence!" the captain hissed. Suddenly he raised his binoculars, and in the glow of the binnacle I saw his jaw drop in horror. "All stop!" he exclaimed, cranking down the engine telegraph. The deck rattled violently as the engines reversed, clawing the ship to a halt. "What is it?" said Jacques. "There," said the captain, pointing off the starboard bow. "About 25 degrees, just past the jetty." Jacques peered through the Alidade telescope and after a moment shook his head. "It's a cruiser," he said. "Looks like he's on a patrol course, right across the strait." "How fast?" said the captain. "I'd say 20 knots," said Jacques. "Putain," the captain cursed. "The strait is only 5 miles wide here. We'll never get past him, not at this speed. He'll cross us 4 times before he ever made it through." "We could make a run for it," Colombo suggested. "Full speed while he's on the outbound leg. He'd have to reverse course. We could get 5 miles on him by the time he's on our tail." "No," said the captain, raising his binoculars, "not with the racket this bagnole makes." The crew held its breath as he gazed out into the darkness. "We can't just stay here," he muttered. "We'll be sitting ducks when dawn breaks. Barra knows we're coming. He probably sent out that cruiser to catch us." Another long silence followed. Finally, he lowered the binoculars. "We'll make a run for it," he said, with grim determination. "Full speed. As soon as he's within a mile, we shut everything down and coast. Slip right past him." Jacques and Colombo glanced hesitantly at each other, but nodded their assent. "Keep a track on him," said the captain to Jacques. "Let us know as soon as he's out of range." At this, Jacques resumed his back-and-forth shuffling between the Alidade and the chart. I felt a tingle flash down my spine. The captain was going toe-to-toe with a cruiser! It is hard to describe the effect such words can have on a boy my age. This is the kind of high-seas adventure I'd craved my whole life, and here I was, right in the thick of it. "Keep course 94 degrees, said Jacques, scribing a fat red line across the chart. "Edouard?" "Yes." "Come here." "You know how to read one of these?" he said, gesturing to the chart. I nodded, having studied many nautical charts in Father's library, but Jacques' chart was a different beast altogether, a spider's web of tangled pencil lines scrawled across it. It took a few moments to make sense of it all. "Why no, what are you doing?" the captain hissed. "Faster this way," Jacques explained, "and quieter." "I don't want him on my bridge," said the captain. "Get him out of here." "Trust me," said Jacques. The 2 men glared at each other for an age, eyes locked in a cold standoff. But in the end, the captain relented and returned to scanning the darkness. My task, Jacques hastily explained, would be to track our progress along the course he had plotted, and signal to Colombo if we started to stray. I was also to keep track of the cruiser patrolling back and forth across the strait. When she came within a mile of us, I was to signal to the captain to shut off the engines. It was a daunting task, but I relished the opportunity to prove myself. Jacques handed me an electric torch and threw a heavy wool coat over my head to block the light. I then felt his finger tapping out Morse code on my ankle. Je, T, 9, 5, 5. As with the card game the night before, I could barely keep up with Jacques' rapid-fire signaling. After a few false starts, though, I got into the rhythm of the thing, and the lines on the chart gradually converged on our position, and that of the cruiser. By agonizing fractions of an inch, the red line crawled along the chart, crossing the strait to the coast of Spain before reversing course and returning to the Quetta jetty. Another turn, and she headed back out to sea. When at last she was a mile out, I heard the captain crank the telegraph, and the ship shuddered as she sprang once more into motion. Against the tranquil backdrop of the strait, the noise was deafening. Surely every sailor from here to Tripoli would be able to hear us. But there's no time to dwell on this, for Jacques' bearing soon came pouring out in a great torrent of letters and numbers, gushing up my leg and arm and spilling onto the map. Within minutes, sweat began to drip from my brow onto the chart, smearing the ever-thickening web of lines that crisscrossed the paper. Mercifully, Colombo proved himself an able helmsman, holding the ship plumb along Jacques' course and leaving me free to focus on the looming cruiser. But though the poor old engine strained with all its might, Richelieu seemed to dig in her heels like a stubborn mule. Meanwhile, the cruiser was a thing to behold, a sleek war machine of almost supernatural speed. Mere minutes seemed to pass before she made her southerly turn and was once again bearing down on us. "How far is she?" said the captain. "Edward," Jacques hissed, jabbing his elbow into my ribs. I stammered. "Quiet," snapped the captain. "How far?" 3.5 miles. I fumbled with the straight edge and compasses as the tapping on my leg continued unabated. The cruiser drew ever nearer, the gap closing with terrifying swiftness. 3 miles. 2.5. "There she is," said the captain. "How far?" Something was wrong. Though Jacques continued to tap a steady stream of figures into my leg, they had become garbled, incomprehensible. G, X, Y, 6, 7, O, S, G... "Jacques." "Quiet! How far?" The taps became sporadic, speeding up and slowing down seemingly at random. P, M, H, X, 7, 8. "How far?" "She's right on us," said Colombo, his voice strangled with fear. My pencil quivered over the chart as I waited for a clear bearing to come through the gibberish. Come on. "Boy, how far?" Then, over the rattling of the Richelieu's engine, I heard another sound, the distant high-pitched hiss of a bow wave. I couldn't wait any longer. "Now!" I cried. The telegraph ratcheted. The engines went silent. I threw off the coat and sprang to my feet. She was right on top of us. Lit by the glare of her running lights, her sleek white hull sliced through the water like a knife, bearing down on us off the port bow. In that horrifying instant, I realized we weren't going fast enough. "He's going to hit us," I blurted. "Turn the engines on." "Quiet," said the captain. "But he's—" I winced as the captain grabbed me by the hair and wrenched me down to the deck. I said, "Quiet!" The cruiser's bow towered above us, the din of her machinery filling the air. I closed my eyes, bracing for impact. Then another sound joined the cacophony, the spinning of the helm. I opened my eyes as Colombo swung the Richelieu hard to port, turning her parallel to the cruiser's course. As the warship thundered past less than 5 fathoms away, I saw her turrets bristling with heavy guns, her decks lined with blue-jacketed sailors. Then, as quickly as she appeared, she melted back into the darkness, and the strait was dark and silent once more. The captain released me as the crew breathed a sigh of relief. "Let's give him another 2 minutes," said the captain, following the receding lights through his binoculars. His voice had lost none of its nervous edge. It was clear we weren't out of trouble just yet. "Tiens," said Jacques, reaching into his pocket. "Go get some cognac. Warm us up." The keyring jangled as he handed it to me. His hands were shaking. "Locker 2E," he said, "beside the paint." I nodded and scurried down the ladder. Once the excitement had worn off, I felt rather proud of myself. While the captain was obviously a hard man to impress, I had no doubt I would win him over. After all, I knew his kind well. By the time I reached the hold, the engines had started and we were once more underway. But for the second time that day, my triumphant mood was shattered as the faint tapping of Morse code reached my ears. I was down the corridor like a shot, fumbling with the keyring as I ran. The moment I reached locker 2B, I plunged the key into the lock and flung open the door. I retched as a grotesque smell washed over me, the fetid stench of an open sewer. A young man lay bound to a soiled metal bed frame, a rag stuffed in his mouth. It was, I realized, the same man I'd seen all those weeks ago when first I'd been imprisoned myself. He blinked in the light streaming in from the corridor, then began to moan and thrash against his bonds. It's all right, I'm here to help you," I said, patting my pockets for something with which to cut his bonds. Finding nothing, I doubled back to the hold, where I found a hatchet lying atop a crate. "Hold still," I said as I returned to the locker. His wrist and ankles, rubbed raw by his bonds, had begun to fester and ooze pus, so I covered my hand with my sleeve before pinning down his arm and cutting the rope in one blow. Dodging his flailing hand, I moved on to the next limb, and the next, until with a final stroke of the hatchet, he was free. Immediately he lunged at me, ramming headfirst into my chest and knocking me to the floor. From a crazy angle, I saw him fling away his gag and flee through the hatchway, his wild screams echoing through the hold. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted after him. I could hear his footsteps clattering up the stairwell above me as I panted and gasped, struggling to keep pace. When I finally reached the main deck, a knot of crewmen had descended upon him, struggling to subdue him as he snarled, kicked, and bit like a wild animal. Up above, I saw Jacques scramble down the ladder from the flying bridge. But he did not join the fray, instead pulling a fire axe from its mount on the pilot-house wall. This he swung against the wall with a deep, reverberating crash. The effect was immediate. The madman suddenly went stiff, as though struck by lightning, and collapsed to the deck, trembling and whimpering. Across the deck, Jacques glared at me with murderous eyes. A voice inside my head screamed, "Run!" But at that moment, night suddenly turned to day as a blinding light washed over the deck. An ear-splitting siren shattered the air, and from the darkness emerged a fully armed cruiser.